This is your reality check.
Now we just wait. All right.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Reality Check, your weekly Canadian podcast that explores scientific controversies and curiosities. I am your host, Darren McKee, and with me, as usual, is the always endearing Elan.
Hello.
Our main cuboid, Adam Gardner.
Sup, cuboids?
And unfortunately, Pat Roach couldn't be here, but we have former TRC host and backbone, Jonathan Abrams.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We are recording this in front of a live audience at Eschaton 2012, a skeptics conference in Ottawa, and we're also doing it in front of Atheism TV, which you can find at atheismtv.com. So if it sounds a little different, our regular listeners, it's because it's live and we're experimenting with some little setups and microphones and different sound audiences and so on. So we usually have 3 segments in the show, but we're going to have 4 this time. I'm going to start by presenting the simulation argument, and then Elan is going to do a game of science fact or science fiction, where we'll be asking your opinion. And then John is going to explore some James Bond myths, and Adam is going to discuss the law of averages.
That's right.
I have to correct you, Darren. I'm actually doing subliminal advertising. If you actually looked at the show notes, you know
You've
that.
changed the notes. Some things don't change.
Who prints? iPad. It's easy. It's
Did you
all
print that a
up to date.
week ago or something?
All right.
This wasn't even discussed in email. It's
No, it
completely
was not.
unprofessional.
No worries. It's always exciting. So first, I'm going to explore the simulation argument. I'm going to describe the initial argument, then 2 assumptions within it, then elaborate on this argument, and then we'll discuss the likelihood of the various options presented within it. It may sound a bit unverifiable, but we can explore the issue with logic and reason, and that's the manner in which I approach it. So the simulation argument is written by Nick Bostrom. He's at Oxford, and he published this about 2003. There's different iterations at different times. And I'll just read the abstract, and then we'll sort of parse it out. At least one of the following propositions is true. 1, the human species is very likely to go extinct before reaching a post-human stage. 2, any post-human civilization is extremely unlikely to run a significant number of simulations of their evolutionary history, or some variations. 3, we are most certainly living in a computer simulation. So one of those he's saying is true. I'm going to unpack them. I'll reword it to make it a bit more accessible, but let me address 2 key assumptions within this argument. The first is something called substrate independence. This is from philosophy of mind, and it's the idea that mental states can exist on any broad class of physical substrates. And that means you don't need it to be biological neurons, but you could be simulated in some sense. The mind could be simulated with chips, with artificial processes and molecules. So as long as a system implements the right sort of computational structures and processes, it can be associated with conscious experiences. It's not an essential property of consciousness that it's implemented on carbon-based biological neural networks like we have, but it could be something like silicon-based processors inside a computer.
I'm a bit lost. I'm going to have to say.
To have a conscious mind, it doesn't have to be something biological.
Right. Okay, got it.
That's the short way of saying it.
And then we have these 3 ideas.
That's the assumption, so we'll get to those ideas in a moment, because I'll come back to it. It'll make sense as it goes along. Further, actually we don't need a further, we'll just stick with what Elan understood. Second, technological requirements of a massive simulation. If you're trying to think about simulating the human mind, you'd have to think about first, well, what would that entail? Like what was required to simulate a brain in terms of how many processes it might take, and are computers anywhere near that in terms of their capabilities? So the assumption generally is that computational processing power will increase over time. In general, there is this famous Moore's law, which says that about every 6 to 18 months, there's a doubling of computational processing power per unit cost of something. But
Correction, it's every 18 months, there'll be a doubling of transistors in a given space in a CPU.
there are numerous variations thereof, but that's probably the exact one that Moore said, correct?
That is Moore's law.
Indeed.
There might be a McKee's law. But I'm not
No,
aware
but they're
of
just
that.
variants. It doesn't have to be that rate, just that it'll keep going up over time.
Yeah, that's the point. It's
Right.
good. We'll be able to calculate these things eventually, if you wait long enough.
And it's quite tricky to predict when this would ever stop, because it seems like every time a new technology reaches its limitations, a new one comes about. So you have vacuum tubes and transistors, and then a new way of using transistors, and now they're probably moving towards some sort of biological 3D integration. We're currently at 16 petaflops, or that's about 16 quadrillion operations per second.
That's pretty good.
That should be enough for anyone.
That should be, one would hope. And then if you just keep thinking, well, what would be possible in an extremely advanced civilization or technology, maybe they could even turn something like an entire planet into a computer. And if that was the case, then you're up to something like 10 to the 42 operations per second, while 16 petaflops was 10 to the 16. So you can see there's vast, vast possibilities as long as we keep going. As for the human brain, it's pretty hard to measure exactly what this would be. But if you look at something like how many synapses are firing, the neurons in your brain and the synapses are related to the neurons firing, we get something like 10 to the 17 operations per second. And that are actually what our senses can take in is about 1 billion times smaller. So if you're trying to simulate a brain, it's more difficult than just simulating what comes in through your senses. Now, if one was going to make a simulation, what exactly would be required? If you had a total environment, that would be more difficult than just simulating the idea of an environment, right? And that would require additional computational processing power. And of course, it depends on the level of detail, the scope, the granularity, that sort of thing. So you don't need to simulate a universe down to the quantum level for every single thing, and that's infeasible unless we discover some new physics. But in order to get a realistic simulation of human experience, much less is needed. You can just have normal ways in which humans interact with their environment and whether they notice any irregularities or not.
I take a bit of an issue with that concept, and that basically has to do with the fact that eventually humans will attempt to do scientific investigation of the subatomic. So unless your simulation is intelligent enough to specifically understand when someone is diving deeper into something than an average human can perceive without technology, you basically would have to have a really good simulation. You really have to have even the granular very small done perfectly. You need to have other galaxies done perfectly so that when an astronomer tries to measure data or measures data, doesn't really dive into it but dives into the data later. There's going to be things that will seem inconsistent with how the universe behaves if that simulation isn't run perfectly.
True.
If that makes sense.
But you wouldn't need to simulate all subatomic processes all the time because most of the time they're not being looked at. That's what it is. Most people don't look at the center of the Earth, right?
Also, are you referring to simulating a brain so that we can talk to a simulated brain here in the real world? Or simulating a brain so that they're in like a little fake environment world like in The Sims?
You're something closer to The Sims where the simulation is occurring within a computer.
Wouldn't it be more interesting if we could, put the simulated brain in a robot so we can like do my dishes?
But he's trying to answer the question of whether or not we're living in a simulation, I thought.
Yeah, so it's whether you're interested more whether we could make a simulated robot to do your dishes or whether we're currently a simulation depends on your own outlook. I think they're both interesting questions.
Yeah, okay.
But this segment's about one thing and not the other. So while it is not possible to get a very exact estimate of the cost of a realistic simulation of entire human history, the research has shown that it's decent to use 10 to the 33, 10 to the 36 operations as a rough estimate, which is far beyond anything we currently have. So coming back to it, this is now in a question format, taking that abstract, which is a bit less accessible. Number one, do you think the human species will ever get to exist in a world of technological capabilities so vast and powerful that with their immense powers, they're able to do things we currently cannot? And I think most people think yes, but it depends on what you mean and how far that goes, right? And then the other one is, do you think immensely powerful future civilizations would not run ancestor simulations? And I find most people think they probably would, that people will want to. People are curious. They're curious of how they came to be. People like currently playing simulated things. They exist in simulations with TV, movies, video games.
Yeah, and people reenact the Civil War like all the time.
Right. They reenact it in video games. They reenact it in reality. And the idea of some people trying this out, if it's possible, seems to make sense to me. It could be that when you get to a post-human stage, we can't really know how something or someone like that would think, and it might be a bit presumptuous to say, well, of course they'd want to do this, because it could be, when you're that advanced, like, well, it'd be boring, it wouldn't be right, it'd be immoral or something, but we don't know. I personally think, even if it was illegal, it'd be pretty hard to police, and someone would try to run these simulations because they'd just be so curious. What do you guys think?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, I think the scope and the size of the universe may not be the size of the universe, but definitely, why not run a simulation if you can? People do things that they can all the time.
So the thing with the simulation is that there must be some limit to the hardware that the simulation is running on, theoretically, right? And so far, as we probe, we find more and more complexity. So the question is, if there's infinite complexity, does that mean we're not in a simulation? If we're in a simulation, the proof is that there isn't infinite complexity? Like, how are these related?
In terms of if it seems like we can always know a bit more, does that mean there isn't a simulation?
Yeah. So as long as we keep finding more complexity, we can't answer the question yet.
Well, I think you can't definitively answer the question anyway, but I think as long as you find more complexity, that doesn't inhibit the idea of a simulation. It just means that the simulation is more sophisticated.
How about the inverse, where you reach a wall and it turns out there is no more complexity?
And there's a little sign that says "Welcome to the simulation"
That would be
at the
nice,
bottom.
yeah.
Be a bit of a giveaway.
Well, maybe we're a simulation, and like we have limits to the size of our universe. You know, we can measure how big that is.
Well, at the same time, some people think the universe is infinite.
Right. Well, so the universe may be infinite, but the observable universe, the universe that was created by the Big Bang, whatever, is of a certain limited size. Is a certain limited amount of matter. If we are in a simulation of a universe that has no such limit, then there is a simulation which is bound by some constraint.
It'd be a subsection of that universe, yes.
But also, like, this could be a case where the simulation only simulates things that we encounter. So, you know, you venture on beyond what appears to be the border, and then the simulation just starts generating new content for that area.
Right, exactly. It could be on an as-needed basis. So if both the things are true, one, that we'll eventually get immense technological capabilities, and it doesn't have to be 10, 20, 30 years as some people predict, but if you assume that we won't kill ourselves, and that is a big assumption, and it will actually technologically progress, which is another assumption, if you want to extend it to 1,000 years, 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years, it'd be pretty hard, in my opinion, to limit what might be possible. Just because if you went 100 years ago and you said to someone, look, I just use wireless to, take this photo and upload it to something, like, what are you talking about? You're basically describing magic, right? Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, as Arthur C. Clarke said. And so I think in 1,000,000 years to say this wouldn't be possible is a bit misguided. But that's my opinion. Now, because we don't know which of these three is true, are you in a simulation? Will people not run simulations if they can, or will we never get there? Philosophically, you can use something called the principle of bland indifference, which means you sort of assign an equal probability to all three, because you just don't know. And we are really in this dark forest of current ignorance, as Nick Bostrom says. So you should apportion your credence roughly between the 1, the 2, and the 3.
So you're saying there's a 1/3 probability that we're in a simulation right now?
Well, yeah, although using probability theory might be tricky, I say the logic indicates that if you buy this, and if you agree that it's not a false trichotomy, that yes, it would mean there's about a 1/3 chance. Now, personally, I think number 2, people won't do this if they can, is unlikely. So then for me, it actually drops to almost half, which is a bit startling, perhaps, but that just seems how it follows. Now,
what about the possibility that one day we will get to the point where we could create a simulation, but we're just not there yet?
That's entirely possible. It could be that we're the first ones out.
Yeah.
Right? That's the thought. That maybe we're the first generation out, which is possible. But as long as more than one simulation is run, and the timing of it all works in terms of how long the simulation runs or how long our civilization went, as long as it's more than one, and they're probably going to run thousands, if not millions, probability-wise in that sense, you're probably not in the real world.
So the idea is that if there is a simulation and that simulation can run a simulation, there's just nested simulations,
Well,
right?
so there's two possibilities. That one, there may be simulations within simulations, or perhaps more startlingly, if you're in a simulation, there is a limit to computational power in the upper world, we'll say, and once you try to run a simulation yourself, it's too demanding, and then you just get shut down.
So I think that might severely limit the number of simulations that could exist in sort of...
It would, but you might be comparing
universe.
billions to trillions, which it still doesn't help your odds that much. Yeah, it's a factor of 1,000, but
And you're
not
talking
that
about
much.
depth. What about breadth? What if it's just like every computer in every house in the future is running a simulation?
Possibly, if they have computers in houses in the same way.
to me, it comes down to... Moore's law is well and good, but at one point we get down to like there's just no more granularity to like matter, and you go smaller and smaller, and you just can't do any more. And I think at one point to say you cannot simulate the universe with all the computation power in the universe makes sense to me.
Yes, as it's so limited and described, certainly.
So the key point is that if we are in a simulation, then that simulation has to be cutting corners somewhere. And I find it very amazing that we could never have noticed that.
Deja vu.
Well, some people think all the cognitive biases or things that happen is because of that. Two, like if you're going with the assumption we could be in a simulation, then the laws of physics of that world aren't necessarily ours, right? And it changes everything. Fair. But I don't necessarily want to rely on that, because then it's like, well, anything goes, and you can't falsify it. Now, why I thought this was interesting is that there's a history of thought experiments like this, sort of solipsistic stuff where you're a brain in a vat, maybe you're in a dream, maybe this, maybe that. And why this one, at least in my opinion, is a bit different, is that it begins from the starting point that things are the way we believe they are. So it's not like you're doubting the world around you like you might in a dream or the brain in the vat stuff. You're saying, okay, what science has shown us, this empirical reality, this is generally how it is. And then from there, that you start to understand how things go. And it seems like technologically we have increased, and we will increase unless we inhibit that way through famine, disease, nuclear war, climate change, or something else, which we can't currently anticipate. And then what's the likelihood of something like a human in the future, this post-human, that will want to run a simulation, or just for fun, of something of its ancestry or evolutionary progress? And the first one, as I said, seems true to me, and the second one also seems true. So then the conclusion seems to be that there's a decent chance you're in a simulation. Although it doesn't sit well with me, and the author who proposed this, he doesn't necessarily think we're in a simulation either. But it does seem like one of them has to be true, one way or another. So before I ask my fellow panelists if they have any more critiques, I was wondering in the audience, by a show of hands, who thinks we'll have vast technological capabilities, either 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, or 100,000 years in the future?
That sounds like a lot of hands.
That's most of you, probably 90%.
No one can show two hands. It's cheating.
How many of you think if this can be done, it won't be done? Show of hands. That's one. Two. Okay, so that's maybe 5%.
This is real science happening right now.
So then, how many of you think we're in a simulation? No hands.
Hey,
one. John, okay, so we got 25% of the panel. I didn't even put my hand up. So what's interesting is that, again, either it's a false dichotomy, the logic is not sound somewhere, or we actually are, we just don't want to admit it. And that sounds very human as well.
But by the way, I wasn't joking. I think there's a very good chance that we're in a computer simulation.
Well, that's interesting. Now, also, does this matter, right? Does this matter at all?
And we're starting a new religion right now.
Well, interesting you ask. So the language and some of the themes associated with religion actually could come into play, because if there was someone running a simulation, you might actually be punished or rewarded in an afterlife how you act in the simulation. Now, I'm not willing to say that's true at all, but it sounds more plausible than what we currently have and think there's an afterlife.
So I can communicate with the person who created the simulation? I call him the programmer.
He is the one.
One programmer who stays up late to 3 a.m. every night.
I believe his name is John. I named him after me. I am after him. Yeah. You are John's chosen one. So that's really just what the segment I wanted to present, that it seems like there's this quirky, interesting thing, which when you start thinking about it, it kind of gains a bit of traction in your head, even though it doesn't quite work. Now, I have friends who are like, well, wait a minute, if you're in a simulation, then it doesn't quite work because, as you said, anything goes, and it's kind of paradoxical, and it doesn't quite fit. But I don't quite buy that argument. And the other person didn't like the use of probability theory when there's so many unknowns here that to have anything sort of mathematical is a bit misleading.
Is there room in this discussion to start analyzing what it means to be a simulation? Like, when we talk about consciousness, you say that consciousness can exist outside of, a biological brain. Consciousness is what a mind is what a mind does.
Right.
So can you say the same thing about reality? Once the simulation gets realistic enough, it may as well be a form of reality.
Right. So that's a good point. That to be dismissive of this theoretical reality we're currently in, saying it's not really real, then it makes you think about what that means, and it's real enough. So if the idea is that you are a physical thing, your brain is a physical thing, this physical thing creates your consciousness, that physical stuff can be made of something else, like computer chips and silicon, and as a consequence, the emotions, the thoughts, the consciousness could be within a computer. And if that's the case, well, what's the difference between reality and slightly pretty close to reality? And you could argue that it's really different because you're an essentialist and there's something magical and special about it. Or you could say, well, it's so functionally equivalent that it pretty much is real. And it's not like, you're going to care any less about the people you love and want to do things that you enjoy and avoid things that cause you harm. So I don't all of a sudden think like, well, then if it doesn't, nothing matters and you'll become a nihilist and so on. That doesn't really follow logically from the idea that you might be living in a simulation.
Darren, did you make it through the entire segment without mentioning the Matrix?
I did say the one, so...
The one. So you did make a passing reference.
Didn't mention Ray Kurzweil, though.
Thank you.
Kudos. So we'll now shift from whether we're living in a simulation to a delightful, realistic, actual, I'm not going to look at your notes, actual game by Elan, science fact or science fiction.
All right. Awkward. The awkward microphone sound, right? Whenever like someone's talking and it's awkward, it always makes the sounds in movies and TV.
And we're going to have the lovely Sarah Mayhew help us out by keeping track of what we guess for our answers and who gets them right and wrong.
Okay, so if any of you listen to any other skeptical podcasts, this is not a copy of anything that happens on any other skeptical podcasts. Because this game is called Science Fact or Science Fiction, and how it works is I'm going to be asking questions to my fellow panelists about a theme, and for each question they will answer whether or not it is a science fact or a science fiction, and then we'll count the score, and then at the end we'll see who's the winner. And if you notice on the score sheet here, the crowd is also going to be playing the game, if you choose. Well, this is awkward. Okay. The whole crowd is going to play, but you don't individually have to play. But how it'll work is for each question, I'll just, say who thinks it's science fact, who thinks it's science fiction, and we'll take the whatever has more, that's the crowd's guess. And at the end, we'll see if the crowd is smarter than the panel of the reality check. Are we good? Okay.
I'm not too comfortable with the idea that I'm going to be made to look stupid, but okay.
It happens every week, so it's okay.
Can we also take a prediction of who's going to win? Because I'm wondering if the crowd has an advantage because they have the wisdom of crowds.
Oh, maybe.
From studying, what's that show? Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? The crowd is
usually right.
Usually better than the contestants.
Except for in Russia, apparently they always try to give the wrong answer to the candidates.
Okay, so by a show of hands, who thinks the crowd has an advantage?
Well, they're biased because
All
they're
of
the
them.
crowd.
They're biased. They think they're smarter than they are.
I know.
Another thing about this segment is that it's going to be about a theme, and the theme is, have you guys ever seen the TV show Breaking Bad? Does anyone watch that show?
No.
Well, it's a really good show. It's like my favorite show. And so I'm going to be
all about it.
It's awesome.
So I'm going to be asking questions about Breaking Bad. There's a lot of science in that show, and I'm going to be, don't worry, if you haven't watched it, it's okay. It's not going to be like actual Breaking Bad trivia. And I'll say something that happened on the show, and we'll explore whether that's actually really possible or whether it's a science fiction. So if you don't mind, I just have my...
You're blocking your own.
Talk to Mike.
I'm just going to wear my Breaking Bad shirt for this, just to make it...
Much like a simulated reality, Elan is now wearing nested T-shirts.
All right. All right, let's do this.
I wear a short sleeve shirt over a short sleeve shirt over a long sleeve shirt.
I'm cool that way.
Question 1. So throughout the series, the protagonist, Walt, he's a chemist who cooks meth. And he uses... Another thing that he does is people die a lot in the show, and he wants to hide the deaths, so the police can't find them. And so what they do is they dissolve bodies in acid. That's what they do on the show a lot. So while this would work, it could take a very long time. And a much quicker solution would have been a mixture of formaldehyde, methanol, and other solvents. Science fact or science fiction. So I'll repeat. The claim is that while it would work to dissolve bodies, it would have been a lot faster to use a solution of formaldehyde, methanol, and other solvents.
Compared to what?
Compared to what he normally does, which is dissolving the bodies in hydrofluoric acid. I think it's hydrofluoric acid on the show.
Chemists, anyone?
Don't ask chemists, ask Breaking Bad fans. All right, so going first is Adam. Science fact or science fiction that the formaldehyde and methanol and other solvents would be faster dissolving bodies than hydrofluoric acid.
Well, you should be chopping them up and feeding them to pigs. But whatever. I'm going to say because hydrofluoric acid is a simple answer with one chemical, and the other one is a bunch, even though I don't know anything about either, it's the one with the bunch. So yes, it would be better science fact.
All right, John is next.
So I'm going to say science fact for the reason that what they use on the show, they probably don't use it because it's the most optimal chemical that they have access to, but because it's the most readily available or cheapest chemical that they would have access to. So is there a possible chemical out there that's better than the one that they happen to use? Sure, why not? But what they used was good enough. So
he's a chemistry teacher, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he cooks meth, so yeah, he knows a thing or two?
Yeah.
That's the premise of the show.
Okay.
All right, Darren.
I appreciate John's logic, and I find it tempting, but to make it more interesting, I'll say science fiction.
Oh.
To have variability.
The problem with this game is that we often all just agree, and we'll get like the fourth question, and everyone's said the same thing.
No, we're gonna change the
and
order
then it
around.
ties. So good on Darren for switching it up.
And also good on Darren for saying science fiction. He rarely does that on the show. It makes me very angry. He
because
usually
it's
just says fiction.
Because this is a science question.
It's about Breaking Bad. Okay.
Everything's science.
And now the crowd. So, who thinks it's science fact? Clapping. Yeah. Okay, who thinks it's science fiction? Oh. All right, so the crowd and Darren say science fiction. John and Adam say science fact. I'm glad that I have at least one question where someone will get wrong. The answer is science fiction. In fact, formaldehyde, methanol, and other solvents are the ingredients used to make embalming fluid, and this is used to preserve bodies, not dissolve them.
Oh wow!
Kudos for that one. That's good.
Good on.
You knew it.
Apparently the
So,
crowd knew it, yeah.
but
Good
actually,
job.
it is true from what I read, hydrofluoric acid wasn't the best choice. He actually would have been better off using a base rather than an acid.
Oh, that's
And-
a trick question.
And no, I was asking about the embalming fluid.
Yeah, but you were like, I took the question to mean there's something better out there.
No,
Bonus
I-
points.
I-
Bonus points. What's the best thing? I don't know.
Oh,
A base.
bonus points to me?
I don't know. To
Okay.
anybody.
Ask them.
A mixture of sodium hydroxide, or lye, with water is quite effective for dissolving animals and probably humans. I don't know if it's been tested.
Humans are animals, Elan.
Anyone who
true.
knows that is a serial killer.
We're about offering practical knowledge.
All right, so we've got 1 for Darren, 1 for the crowd, 0 for John and Adam. Going to question 2 of 5. Question 2. So another thing that happened in the show is that Walt tries to kill this guy. I'm not going to say whether he kills him or not. I'm not going to spoil. But he tries to kill some guy in the second season using a poison called ricin. And the reason he wants to use ricin is because he claims that it takes a long time to take effect. So they could poison the guy and kind of get away, and then no one would ever know that it was them who poisoned him. So, science fact or science fiction, is it true that while ricin is deadly, it takes at least a few hours to take effect? Science fact or science fiction? Let's go with the crowd first. Who says science fact? Okay. And science fiction? Oh.
Pretty even.
Okay,
Sounded
hands
like
up for
science
science fact. Hands up for science fiction.
Oh,
Fact,
that's
fact,
close.
Fact, science fact. Crowd's a science fact.
Yeah.
All right, let's go backwards. So Darren.
It's true that it'll take a couple hours.
Okay, so you say science fact.
Yes, science fact.
All right. You didn't look at my notes. Not that my notes say that.
I didn't look at. I am consistently trying to restrain my peripheral vision.
Good.
So the question is, as opposed to the show claiming that would only take a few weeks.
No, I'm saying, is the show true? Is the show being realistic and saying that while it would kill the guy, it would take a couple of hours, at least, before it takes effect? Is that fact or fiction?
So is the show fact?
I guess, yes.
So would it take that long?
Yeah, as opposed to him dying right away from the poison, does
Okay.
it actually take a few hours to take effect?
I just want to make sure I understand the question.
Of course, of course. It's important. This is important.
The trust has been removed already.
So I'm going to agree with the crowd and say science fact. That's a very easy thing for them to look up and use. And it would be a really, really big miss if they screwed that up. And I'd be ashamed of watching all 5 seasons of Breaking Bad so far if they screwed that up.
Adam?
I have a follow-up question, and you can tell me if it's not fair to give an answer. Are you saying that it's not going to show any signs until a couple hours,
That it
or that
won't-
it's just going to gradually kill him? Because that's normal.
No noticeable. Maybe there could be biological inside signs. I'm saying that there's no noticeable signs. Walt would be able to get away, and no one would know that he was the one who poisoned Tuco.
I'm tempted.
Spoiler.
That's not a spoiler.
Yeah.
That's just saying the plot of the show is there's a guy named Tuco, and Walt is against
No.
him.
Maybe
And
he
try to
saw
not poison-
another
Stop
chemistry
talking.
teacher,
It's a spoiler.
and the other chemistry
Also, how
teacher
long do we have to
decided-
wait?
Stop talking.
Okay, that's season 2.
Infinite.
That's so long ago. It's like 2000, before 2010.
People don't watch things live anymore. They watch the download.
Okay, so we can't talk about any TV show ever.
No.
Yes. So, what's your answer?
Raise it in context.
What's your answer?
The question was. I'm just trying to remember which one true or false means.
So is the
Everyone
show
said
correct?
science fact.
The show's wrong.
You're saying science fiction.
Show's wrong.
Say it the right way.
Science fiction.
Okay. The answer is science fact.
Yeah.
I throw in an easy one, except for Adam. It's never easy for him. So ricin inactivates the ribosomes in cells, making them unable to produce proteins. And cells need these proteins to survive and reproduce, so when ribosomes are inactivated, the cells die. But because the symptoms are caused by failure to make protein, they emerge only after a variable delay because there's some proteins that have already been made.
Okay, I have a follow-up.
Yeah.
And you can feel free not to give me an extra point for this. I have not seen The Breaking Bad. My guess is that Tuso, or whatever the hell this guy's name is.
Madame Tussauds.
Madame Tuso is a lady?
No.
We've said too much already.
I believe she meets another chemist, or is a chemist or something, who gives her the proteins to overcome the problem long enough so that the thing gets through her system and then she survives.
That's exactly what happens.
Yeah, that's
Let's
it.
move on.
Madame Tussauds survives because of all of her chemist friends. All right.
Breaking Bad. Everyone's a chemist. Everyone makes meth.
Everyone's a chemist in Breaking Bad.
I haven't seen it. I don't know. Bryan Cranston. He's great.
Okay. Question 3. Oh, what's the score here? All right, so we've got Darren's got 2, John
we don't
has
need to go over
1,
the score
Adam
now.
has 0, and the crowd has 2. So it's Darren versus the crowd right now. We'll see if John or Adam can catch up. Adam's not going to catch up. Let's see if John can catch up.
I could catch up.
All right.
Statistically speaking. The law of averages says I could catch up.
Okay. In the second episode of the most recent season, but I'm not going to say too much. Okay, but a character kills himself at the beginning of the episode. So it's not as if it's like I'm spoiling the whole dramatic thing. A character kills himself with an automated external defibrillator when police arrive to question him about his relationship with another character. Basically, he goes into the bathroom, he takes one of these automated external defibrillators, and he attaches it to himself, and he kills himself. So science fact or science fiction, could he do this in real life? Can you use an automated external defibrillator like the one in the show to kill yourself like this mystery character did? Science fact or science fiction? Let's start in the middle. Let's start with John.
Okay, so I have a question. So I've seen this episode. Like, I'm caught
Yeah.
up on the show. Great show, guys. So
It's my favorite show.
Who are we thanking? Bryan Cranston's like,
By the way, thanks to my fiancée Dina for buying me this shirt. Let's clap for her. There you go. Okay. All right.
So my question is, did he just use the defibrillator, or did he did he stand in a puddle of water or something like?
No, he didn't stand in a puddle
So
of
he
water.
just used a defibrillator, set it to max.
But it's one of these fancy British defibrillators, not like the ones on Scrubs where they go clear. It was like one of these ones with the little. It's like a personal one that you could use on yourself.
Like the one in the James Bond movie.
So I would say it's possible if you have a heart condition, maybe. Science. I'd say science fact. Like, you don't want to do this unless you actually need to do it. It's dangerous.
Okay, John says science fact. Let's go to Darren.
I will also say science fact. I just think if you have something to fiddle around with your heart, you could stop your heart. Now, you might still be alive in your brain for a bit, but that's not what you asked. So we'll say yes, science fact.
Science fact. All right, John science fact. Let's do crowd. He'll go last.
Oh, okay.
I'm not gonna forget. I'm trying to mix up the order.
It's only fair given the score.
Okay, so crowd. Who in the crowd says science fact? Okay, I'm getting so much applause for this segment. Who says science fiction? Fiction is more? Okay, Darren says fiction is more. Okay, Adam.
I think this couldn't kill him. Does that mean fiction?
That means science fiction.
Science fiction, for many reasons that are all inconsistent with each other. One is it's made to use on yourself.
Only one needs to be right.
They wouldn't design it so you could actually hurt yourself. 2, I think maybe he has to put some gel or something like they do in the movies. And 3, maybe when he turns it on and it starts to shock him, his nerves go out, so he's not holding against himself anymore. Does that make sense?
It's designed to do it
All right.
against yourself.
Adam
maybe-
says science fiction.
You don't hold it against yourself.
And for completely wrong reasons, he is correct. It's science fiction, and the crowd is correct. Oh, crowd!
Crowd pulls ahead.
Crowd
Back
is
on
good.
the board.
What is with you guys?
That one was so close within the crowd, you know.
Good job, crowd.
So these AEDs, or automated external defibrillators, are designed to be used by untrained members of the public and are therefore made so that people can't use them to kill themselves.
That was one of the 3. Is
Yeah.
the second one I said.
So basically, one thing that's part of them is they analyze the patient's heart rhythm and determine automatically whether a shock is required. And if the heart is not in fibrillation, then the unit will not be able to deliver a shock. That's how it's designed.
That's not what I said.
Also, another other reason I found from somewhere else. By the way, all the notes for this will be in the show notes, so you could check my sources. Also, they will trcpodcast.com. It's true. Check it out. Also, they will not work if the chest pads are incorrectly placed, and the person said that they most certainly were incorrectly placed in the episode. So there you go.
Yeah, in movies they always do like this. I think you're supposed to do something weird like
Well, no, he had this thing where he put one in his mouth and he put something there, and then went, it was a pretty cool death. Like the way he fell, I thought was really just like.
But you probably wouldn't be able to get a pulse if you did that if one was in your mouth or something like that.
I'm not listening. So 3 for the crowd, 2 for Darren, 1 for John, 1 for Adam. 2 questions left, so maybe it might be time to start gaming it. People who are behind go against what. All right.
What do you mean?
So question 4. So yeah, the whole story of the show is about how like Walt's meth has the highest purity around. That's the reason why he's able to, his meth is so popular, has the best purity. At one point, Jesse, his partner, makes 96% pure meth. Wow. And at one point, Walt says he has 99% pure meth. So science fact or science fiction? Meth with purity over 90% would actually be significantly better than what is currently available on the market. Is 90% the shit? Sorry.
There are children in the audience, Elan.
Only
guys.
2.
Thanks
They're
for
older
listening.
children. They're like young adults. If they could watch Breaking Bad, they could. Not that they can't. I don't know. So first, let's do. Who hasn't gone first yet? You haven't gone first.
I did have gone first.
You've gone. John hasn't gone
Or
first.
did I go first last time?
He went first. He went first. The middle, starting with John thing, he said.
John, go first.
Okay. I think based on the way you phrased it, I'm going to try to meta-analyze you. I'm going to say science fiction because I have a feeling that there's some kind of like diminished returns on the purity of meth. Like once it's over 90%, then anything more, your body can't, tell the difference. But if it's too low, then it's not as good. It's not as much the shit.
The bomb.
Well, on the show, they call it that.
Yeah, it was a quote.
Oh, I thought you guys were just being vulgar.
You can say anything if you're quoted.
So
Good.
you're saying science.
So I'm saying science fiction.
So my question was, meth with purity over 90% would actually be significantly better than what's on the market. You're saying science fiction, meaning there's stuff on the market better than 90%?
No, I
I
thought...
did it the other way around.
No, I understood it to be that the fiction means that having it over 90% makes no difference.
That's not. No. Sorry. Let me rephrase. What I mean to say is there's nothing on the science, fact or fiction. There is nothing on the market better than 90% in terms of like higher, like just mathematically.
Oh.
Like is 90% actually the best out there?
So is it possible to buy the kind of meth they talk about on the show?
Exactly.
I have no idea, actually.
Wait, just to clarify, you're saying 92% meth is impossible, or 92% is not significantly better than 90%?
My claim is that the best meth in the real world.
Oh, the simulation.
Oh, don't be confusing. My claim is that the best meth in the real world is much lower than 90%. And thus, the meth on Breaking Bad is actually really awesome. Is Breaking Bad being true that this higher than 90% meth is actually an outstanding achievement in meth creation?
Okay, so are we talking about like available on the street or like
Just
doable in the lab?
anywhere that I could find on the internet that talks about meth purity.
Anywhere you could find on the internet.
I'm gonna stick with science fiction.
Okay, science fiction. All right, crowd. Does the crowd turn? I haven't been keeping track of the score.
Does the crowd really understand still? Because
Is it hard? Okay, here, let's do this. All right, is the real world higher or lower than 90%? Okay, say fact if you think it's lower. So, who says science fact? Okay, who says science fiction? I think it's more fiction, or the fiction people clap louder, but science fiction. Okay, now Darren.
Okay, so
Science fact or science fiction, meth with purity over 90% would actually be significantly better than what is currently on the market.
see, that's what you said first.
Yeah.
And now you said 4 separate things.
That's what it
separately,
means.
differently than that.
Is over 90% better than what's out there now in terms of the percentage?
In terms of percentage, because
Yeah.
you
saying
said
better,
better.
makes me think
we
that
thought
it's
you meant
like-
better like quality.
No, I just meant better like that high purity.
So just say higher.
So
Higher.
So does meth above 90% exist in the real world? Is that
Yeah.
your question? Sure, why not?
So wait, you're saying that there is
I don't know,
meth-
whatever it is. I'm saying it does exist above 90, whatever that means.
So you're saying science fiction. Okay. Adam?
I'm saying science fiction. I think meth is complicated. I've never done meth. No one should do meth, especially you two.
Don't do drugs, kids.
Don't, it's not cool. That'll stuff a mess up your life. You can watch Breaking Bad. They probably tell you why. But I'm sure there's other crap like that enhances the bouquet of the meth or whatever. There's a binding agent on with like pills are like lactose and whatever with a small amount of the active ingredient. I can't imagine it's like 90% of metho whatever mean the thing
So
that
are
meth
you,
is.
are you saying that
So
it
I'm saying
doesn't exist?
Science fiction. The
So you're
real
saying
number's
that-
lower.
You mean fact?
You're saying that the real world
That's
is
science
lower.
fact.
The real
That's
world's way
science
lower.
fact. That's science fact.
I'm saying science
Okay.
fact.
Adam said fact.
Your question was
Darren
confusing.
said fiction. John said fiction, and the crowd said fiction. And the answer is science fact.
Oh.
Which means, because maybe no one knows, like, what does that actually mean? Because I guess I messed up that question. What I'm saying is that 90% is really high, and that doesn't exist in the real world. So, according to the U.S. Department of Defense, their National Methamphetamine Threat Assessment, their data shows a 14% increase from 63.7% to 72.9% purity in average methamphetamine, purity during 2005 to 2009. So they were like saying it went from 63 to 72, and that's significant, and that's recent. That's up to 2009. We've got 72%.
But that doesn't mean. Are you saying that it's impossible to get above 90, or they just currently haven't?
So then another source, the National Criminal Justice Reference Service report from 2003, reports meth purities rarely being found over 80%.
Now I would say
Rarely, number one.
Over 8, I said 90%.
Yeah, but rarely above 80 could mean 90.
And you said ever.
I
This
said
is a bad question.
Okay, let me repeat the question one more time for myself.
now,
Meth with purity.
Right now it's only for you, Elan.
Meth with purity over 90% would actually be significantly better than what is currently on the market. That is true. That is
Alright,
science
okay.
fact.
Okay, here's what I think. Again, I don't do math, but like at one point, just take two meths, right? Like if I've got two 50% meths and I just take them, it's the same as taking 100% meth,
like
right?
No.
It would work with like chocolate.
All right.
The chocolate wouldn't taste as good if it's not.
So going into the last question, Darren has 2, John has 1.
She hasn't marked it.
You didn't mark that one?
Well, what's the answer?
She marked it. Only Adam got it right.
Alright.
Darren has 2, John has 1, Adam has 2, the crowd has 3.
I'm back in the
But
game.
for a special twist, this last question is worth 2 points.
Oh wow.
There's actually 2 questions. It's not like just like a lame sort of, it's worth 2 for no reason. Okay, so there's still a chance for Darren and John. Well, John could tie it, Darren could still win, Adam could still win, and the crowd, it's your game to lose. So, question 5. In season 1, episode 6, I'm just going to say what happened. I'm sorry.
Oh no.
Walt passes a plastic bag of mercury fulminate off as crystal meth. He like walks into a building, people think it's crystal meth, but it's actually mercury fulminate, which is an explosive thing, and he uses it to blow stuff up and then threatens to blow more things up if he isn't given the money he's owed. It's really awesome. It's a really good episode of Breaking Bad.
That's against the meth dealer's code.
It was really awesome.
It was awesome.
It was really
So,
awesome when you didn't know what was going to happen.
What episode was that again? 6?
Season 1.
Episode 6.
Oh, okay.
So you know for sure.
Part 1. So part 1 of my 2-part question. Part 1, science fact or science fiction. Mercury fulminate is in fact a good substitute for crystal meth, as it also comes in the form of chunks of glass crystals. So it was a good replacement. Part 2, mercury fulminate is sensitive to friction and thus couldn't have been carried to mercury fulminate is sensitive to friction and thus couldn't have been carried the way Walt casually carried it without there being an accident. So part 1 is it's a good substitute for crystal meth. Part 2, it's sensitive to friction and thus couldn't have been carried the way that Walt carried it. So let's just go as same order as the first question. So Adam, go first.
So which question?
Answer both.
Yeah, so first question, is it glass-like? I don't think that's unreasonable, so I have no insight
Okay,
into
science
what
fact.
this is.
For,
So
maybe,
science
maybe
fact.
Sarah, you should mark down these,
I believe it's
like, or
glass-like.
remember them. I don't know if you'll remember everyone's both answers.
Science
I don't know.
fact.
We'll remember our own
Science
answers.
fact. Do I
Okay.
answer both questions?
Yeah, answer the second one also.
The second question, I would agree. Reminds me of the episode of Lost where Arntz or whatever his name was,
Yeah.
the Jay Leno guy.
Spoiler.
He's like, I'm not going to say what happens, but anyway, something really cool
All right.
happens in Lost.
So you're saying science fact and science fact.
And the guy from Lost was also a chemistry teacher.
That's
Or a science teacher. I think he was a chemistry teacher.
high school, yeah.
It's a good show, except the last season was horrible.
All right, John.
Science
So
fact.
he does science fact twice.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so the first question is mercury
Fulminate.
fulminate like glass?
Yeah, is it like meth?
Yeah, it doesn't look
Leave
like
glassy
glass.
chunks.
So I'd say sure, science fact.
Okay, and the
And
second.
the second question is, was it possible for Walt to walk casually with
Well,
it?
I'm saying that it wasn't possible. Hey, that's.
Science fact, it would.
I'm
blow
saying
up.
that it's sensitive to friction and thus couldn't have been.
Okay, it would have probably been easier if you made it so that the
Alright.
science fact always agrees with the show.
Okay, that's probably true.
Elan always agrees with the show.
Should we re-record this segment? Would that be okay? Well, that's what we would do normally.
I'm stopping the crying.
We would have ditched question 4.
So just for the record, the second part of this question is inverted.
Sure.
So I would disagree with the show and therefore say science fact.
Okay, so you're saying fact and fact.
Fact and fact.
Okay, both. Okay, Darren.
Science fact, science fact.
Okay, and the
So
crowd.
I win already. I already win.
Who says that? So for the first, let's do the first question. So mercury fulminate is a good substitute for crystal meth. So who says science fact for that? And who says science fiction? Less. Okay, fact for the crowd. And the second one, mercury fulminate is sensitive to friction and would have caused accidents. Science fact. Hi. Science fiction. Yeah. Fact. Everyone says fact, right?
So I lose. Sorry.
Oh, so the game's over.
Ha ha ha. There's no tiebreaker?
Well, we can have a ranking.
Well, let's still see what happens. So, for part 1, you're all wrong. It's science fiction.
Oh, damn it.
So the synthesis of mercury fulminate involves dissolving mercury in nitric acid and adding ethanol to the solution. However, you end up participating a white to grayish brown powder, depending on the purity. Depending on the purity, it's white to grayish brown, and definitely not glassy crystals. It's like a powder.
So is that better or worse for taking drugs? Like, I don't really know. Meth.
No, it was
just put in
just
your
he
mouth?
was walking down, and everyone thought he was holding meth. But in real life, people have been like, "That's not meth. That's powder." Mm-hmm. That's how they talk on the
It's
show.
like trying to covertly build an Iron Man suit in a cave. It'd be like, dude, you're making a suit. You're not making a rocket. This is stupid.
And for the second one, you're all correct. It is science fact. The explosive is highly sensitive to just about everything: shock, sparks, flame, friction, and heat. He very likely would have not made it up to Tuco's office without having an accident. Madame Tussauds office.
So you're saying that the show got it wrong, like on every level?
Yeah, that scene was wrong.
Well, I feel so disillusioned because like one of the reasons I liked watching the show is because it had cool science in it. Turns out they're just using science and abusing
The
it.
last one's worth 2 points.
Wrong science can still be
Oh,
cool.
everyone got one. Yeah, you got yeah.
I only got.
All right. So final score for those listening. The people who are here can see the board that Sarah has so kindly filled out for us. Crowd wins with 4. Adam and Darren tie for second with 3, and John pulling up the rear with 2.
Congratulations, crowd.
Congratulations.
Doesn't that mean we get 1 more point for that first thing? Wisdom of the crowd? It's the principle of the thing.
But John also voted for the crowd, and they would tie us all up. I don't feel comfortable with that.
Thank you, Elan, for that very entertaining game of science fact or fiction. And maybe we were giving off some subliminal messages to give you help with your answers, but maybe they also use subliminal messages in advertising. Is that true, John?
Before I get to that, Darren screwed up at the beginning of the show and mentioned that I'd be doing James Bond myths. I was going to do that because, James Bond's popular these days, but I changed my mind at the last minute. But I don't want to leave you guys hanging, so a couple James Bond myths, just quick, snappy. Let's get it done. So, can you kill someone by painting them with gold, like in Goldfinger?
Yes.
No, you
Oh,
can't.
it's a myth. I thought it was a game. Sorry.
The interesting thing about that,
I'd say yes, too. If you made it so they couldn't breathe through their skin.
they can breathe through their nose and mouth, but so the truth is you don't breathe through your skin. You sweat through your skin.
Humans don't breathe through their skin. It's not discriminate.
Yeah, I guess some
To any of the non-humans in the crowd.
maybe for an
Thanks for showing up.
And so, but it was a popular belief at the time that you could suffocate if you painted all over your skin. So for the filming of the movie, they actually left a 6-inch square patch on the actress's front, I believe, depending on the shot in the movie, so that she wouldn't suffocate.
Okay, cool.
And the second myth, remember it's myths, plural. The second one was that sumo wrestlers from Japan, I guess that's where sumo wrestlers come from.
The Yokozuna was Hawaiian, I believe. Wasn't he?
Oh, snap.
So the myth is that professional sumo wrestlers can raise their testes into their body when they fight so that they don't get damaged down there. And so,
Into their body?
Which movie was that?
so that was, it wasn't in the movie, it was in the book, You Only Live Twice, written by Ian Fleming. But it became a popular belief, maybe not currently, but it was for many years. And apparently it was popularized by that book, by Ian Fleming. He basically is responsible for that myth.
But it's not true.
It's not true.
No.
No,
All right,
sumo wrestlers cannot do that.
No one can do that. We don't have to.
The thing I'm confused about that is they're about pushing each other out of the ring, right? They're not kicking each other in the nards.
No, but your thighs might,
I guess they have to wear jock straps like the rest of us.
E Honda had some moves that could reach it.
My favorite character.
Yeah.
So on to the main event, subliminal advertising. So have you ever go to a movie and then in the middle of the movie you're like, all of a sudden I have a strong urge to drink Coke or to eat popcorn? It's a common claim that that you can show just very quick frames of messages like drink Coke or eat popcorn that you consciously do not take in. Like you don't say, oh, wow, the screen just said drink Coke. But your brain somehow subconsciously takes it in and influences you without you consciously knowing. So it's subliminal advertising. So where does this come from? Before I even get to whether it's possible or not, where does this come from? So it's been around for this concept that you could influence people subliminally. It's been around for about 100 years, since the turn of the last century, or the previous century, I guess. But it became very popular in the 60s due to a researcher named Vickery, who basically held a press conference and launched a business claiming that he ran a study where for 6 weeks in a New Jersey movie theater, he flashed drink Coke and eat popcorn for 1/3000th of a second every 5 seconds. So he used a high-speed projector and basically showed these frames very quickly. So the human vision system cannot basically see such images. Yet, he claims that by doing this, Coke sales went up 18% and popcorn was up 57% as a result.
That's like over 100 times the speed of a film.
Yeah,
That's insane.
Well, yeah, most films projected at 24 frames per second. Yeah. So doing it at 3,000 frames per second is pretty fast. So what's going on here? Because if that's true, that's pretty shocking. And as a result, the public was alarmed by this. You know, this is kind of crazy. It's almost like mind control, even. So this sounds super impressive, but consider that since then, no other researcher has been able to replicate these results. In fact, no one has been able to show any significant effect due to these kinds of subliminal ads at all. For example, the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, so it's time to bring in some Canadian content to this Canadian podcast, they commissioned the same researcher, Vickery, to try it out on Canadians on a massive public scale by showing the message, telephone now, flashing it 352 times during a half-hour show. Unfortunately, fortunately, this did not increase the calls to the CBC as a result, so it was deemed a failure.
Well, did they say the number?
I believe it was a call-in show.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. It's my CBC voice.
The CBC has like this weird microphone system in it, so you can hear every like mouth movement. It's I don't know, whatever.
And they kind of talk like this.
They're very calm and sound very confident. Anyway.
We're an antagonistic podcast. Any other audio mediums, like they're going down if they mess with us, like they did.
So does that mean subliminal advertising or subliminal messages is bogus? There's nothing to it? Well, the interesting thing I found is that there actually might be something to it. So Professor Timothy Moore of York University, that's a Canadian university if I'm not mistaken,
yes,
more
you're correct.
Canadian content, writing in Skeptical Inquirer, says that there's insufficient evidence that multi-word messages, like drink Coke, have any effect. But there is perhaps some evidence that showing quick single word or single images to people can change moods slightly. So showing an angry face can put you in a negative mood. Showing a happy face can raise your mood to the point where so you could show someone an image or a word that's overtly positive or negative. While your conscious brain doesn't notice that you saw that image, your mood slightly gets adjusted. So it's a small effect and probably not enough to actually be useful in advertising. despite that fact, the National Association of Broadcasters in the U.S., they banned the use of subliminal advertising during the firestorm in the 60s, despite the fact there's no evidence that it actually works. It wasn't banned in Canada until there was a board game that was advertised initially in the States that flashed the message to buy the game in a television commercial. And when it came out that this is what was happening, it was pulled from the air because they violated the rules of the U.S. broadcasters.
But it was a commercial for the board game.
Yeah, it was a commercial for the board game.
And they were advertising saying buy the board game.
Yeah.
That's allowed, I think.
Not at that rate.
But not subliminally. So there was a belief that subliminal is almost like mind control. It makes you do things you wouldn't normally do.
Oh, so it's like more powerful than actually showing the board game and showing people having fun and saying you should buy this game. But that doesn't work. But the flash, that's going to get you to buy it.
Because you're a slave to your subconscious. And so it's bypassing your conscious decision making. So that was the idea, and that was the fear.
How did it sell?
I don't think it made
And
any
that game was Monopoly.
Oh, that game was I believe the game was Husker Du, and then so the company that produced that board game, they denied all knowledge that this was going on. It was the advertising company that produced the commercial that was responsible. So it was pulled from the air, but it wasn't pulled from the air in Canada. It actually appeared in Canada at a later date, and so there was a re-flame up of this firestorm in Canada, where then apparently in Canadian law it was then outlawed, like in Canadian law to outlaw subliminal messaging, and so it's one of those laws that's on the books now. It's like, do we need to remove it? Because it's not even useful to do subliminal advertising, so it doesn't matter that it's illegal or not. But
it would be annoying if someone did it sort of ironically or to be fun, like making a Fight Club reference or something in their commercial, and then they get arrested and the commercial gets taken off the air.
Sometimes shows put single frames. I watch a lot of Sailor Moon. They do that a lot. They'll be like, boom, single frame of a weird person showing their tongue or something, and it's not subliminal. It's not affecting my mood, but it's just stuff they do. It's
But
kind of fun.
in this case, it's usually you wouldn't notice it.
No, you never. You just notice something and you're like, what was that? And you go back and you pause it. Well, the problem is a show is on TV is going to be at, it depends how it's made, but 1/24th or 1/30th of a second. So you wouldn't actually be able to do 1/3000th or whatever. Yeah. Same thing with the CBC. They would have had to do a single frame. So it would have had to be at the most a 30th of a second. Yeah,
it might be kind of hard to read a message at 1 frame out of 30. So it might not, it's debatable if it's true subliminal. But if you consciously can't read the message, then it might as well just be subliminal. You might have noticed there was a flash or something.
Right. You will notice a single frame in film or TV.
But even if you do notice it, you think it would have a big effect. But regardless.
But in the day of PVRs, now we can just go back and check. Whereas back in the day, it'd been like, oh, did you see something? I don't know. I guess we'll never know. Have a nice day. I'm going to go buy some Coke. Boom.
There have been other cases where other advertisers have tried subliminal messaging and advertisements, and then usually it gets in the press and they apologize and they remove it, but it doesn't really work anyway, so it's not worth getting all upset about. So it's just a waste of time and effort on the advertiser's part. Subliminal messaging appears in other mediums as well, like in music. Some people accuse some rock bands of including backwards messages to secretly influence people. There's no evidence that works either, and that also causes firestorms. It was really big in the 90s to rag on music for that. And then there's also subliminal self-help. I think The Simpsons had an episode about that where Homer was trying to lose
tapes
weight
and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Vocabulary as opposed to weight loss.
And that probably deserves another segment on its own.
Where the boudoir comes the voluptuary. What's that now? You
can promise to do it later, even though you're not on the show anymore.
Yeah, maybe I'll do it next time I'm on the show. And so that's it. So we've been flashing all sorts of messages behind us while you've been listening to the podcast.
Download our podcast.
Why would they download? You don't need to download this episode.
Well, if totally want to download here, they could say they were there.
Or they could be like, we're the crowd in the crowd.
Right. That applause, that was me. That one clap.
And we've been flashing the message, clap vigorously at the end of John's segment.
Yay. I don't know why I'm doing this.
I'm facing the wrong way, so I didn't see it. So I'm not clapping. I don't care.
So thank you for that, John. And I just want to say that we know on some level advertising works. But if it's flashed really, really quickly, it's not going to. But we also know something called priming works, which is when something is flashed very quickly, it can influence your subsequent decision. This is in psychology studies where something comes quickly, you don't know what it is, and then you might process a word more quickly or more slowly, or as you said, happy face, sad face, and now you associate that slightly with something else. Whether that extends over the time frame of seconds or minutes is highly debatable, which is why you said it pretty much doesn't work. But it's also the general issue that we're consistently influenced by things we don't quite fully process as we navigate through the world.
I thought that was a segue. Turns out it was a comment.
Yes, it was. Well, people clap before I had a chance.
Turn your comment into a segue.
And as we understand the world and... no, I got nothing.
And a lot of things in the world are averages.
Average.
A lot of things are average. And speaking of average-looking things,
Adam. Oh, snap.
That's actually one of the best compliments I've ever gotten about my appearance. But
Right in the middle of that curve.
I'll take it.
It's a sweet spot.
Thanks.
Think about how many people are within one standard deviation. Like 66% of the population.
That's pretty good.
Now, is it illegal to be average? That's what this segment's about, right? The law of averages?
Sure. Yeah, it's a law, and lawyers are all evil, so don't trust them.
Everyone has
Except
to be
for
above
lawyers.
average.
That's cool.
Everyone has to be above average?
Because if everyone's special, then no one is.
all right, let's go.
So a buddy of mine approached me at work. He'd overheard a coworker talking about the lottery. This was a couple weeks ago, not the last weekend lottery. How according to the law of averages, something stupid. So he was a bit annoyed. He came to talk to me, and I ended up being annoyed too. As people who pretend to know a lot about math and statistics, neither of us actually knew what the law of averages was. So we were pretty sure he must have gotten it wrong or something. So we looked it up, and the real truth was much more satisfying. The law of averages is a term that's used to mean a great many things, most of them being total nonsense. It's not a real statistical or mathematical term at all. It's actually a layman's term used to explain statistical concepts that are usually incorrect. So to illustrate, here's an example I found online. It's from a website, How to Turn Your Ability into Cash. The chapter was How the Law of Averages Can Make You Rich. I'm just going to read this brief thing here. Take a coin and toss it into the air 100 times. Mark down the number of times it falls heads and the number of times it falls tails. What happens? There are two sides to that coin and both sides are exposed. The law of averages determines the number of times that the coin falls heads and the number of times that it falls tails. As there are only two sides exposed, it must fall an equal number of times heads and an equal number of times tails. A coin tossed into the air a sufficient number of times will get the same result every time. So the person who wrote this did not do this experiment. The odds of having 50 heads and 50 tails when you flip a coin 100 times is 8%. So it suggests that basically when most people talk about the law of averages, they're suggesting that events will always even out over time, which is completely untrue. Usually they don't mean an exact equal number, but they generally mean there's an evening out. So it's also known as the gambler's fallacy. Elan covered this on episode 72, but basically it's the idea that something is due if it doesn't happen for a while. So random events that go one way will tend to go the other, just to even out. So if you flip a head a bunch of times on a coin flip, it's more likely to be tails on the next flip. If you roll a roulette wheel black a bunch of times, it's more likely to be red the next time. This is not true. That's not how the world works.
Because those are independent events.
Exactly. Coin flips, wheel spins, playing the lottery, they're assuming no cheating, no rigging of the device or anything like that. Completely independent probabilities. It doesn't matter what happened before. The future is completely unpredictable.
So if they are dependent events, is that what we refer to as regression to the mean?
It really depends on how they're dependent. Most of the time, if there was going to be a trend, it would be like the wheel's going to go on red more because the wheel's broken, or it's not really a 50-50 probability or something like that. But yeah, there are chances where like my chance of eating in the next hour will definitely be dependent on whether or not I ate in the hour previous. If I just had a meal, I'm not going to eat another meal, right? Not that that's something people consider to be random. And that was probably a horrible example, but that's just to illustrate the basic idea. So to extrapolate to other things, so if you haven't won the lottery in 30 years, you're as likely to win on your next ticket as you would have been the first time, except you didn't win the first time, so we actually know the probability of that. If you're on the moon killing princess flans to get a pink tail and they haven't dropped in 100 fights, you're no more likely to get it on the next fight.
What is
you were
this?
the first.
Is this a Sailor Moon reference?
That is a Final Fantasy IV reference.
Oh.
That was something special for Final Fantasy IV fans. This law is sometimes used to assume that a rare event will eventually happen given enough time, which can be true if the event is actually feasible. It's likely to happen. Like the lottery is pretty unfeasible that an average person is just going to win, or that you're personally going to win, depending if you just want a new card. So like a 1 in 100 chance thing is probably going to happen after thousands of times. But if you've done it 1,000 times and you haven't won, it's still the same probability the next time you do that event. There is a real mathematical principle that's a bit similar. It's called the law of large numbers. It says that the more random attempts of something you make, the more the average will approach the expected value. So you roll a die once, you're not going to get 3.5. It's 1 in 6 of any number, but you roll it 100 times and you divide it by 100, it's going to be close to 3.5, but not exactly. If you play enough pen and paper RPGs, you'll figure this out eventually. You roll 1 or 2 die. It varies greatly what your result you'll get. You're rolling like 8 to 10 dice. It's going to be a pretty standard number. It's not going to be much variation. So the law of averages isn't a real thing. It's just a word used by people that don't really understand probabilities. If they use the term gambler's fallacy instead, I would hope they would quickly realize it's total nonsense.
Thank you, Adam.
All right.
So, well, wait. Sorry, we'll have to cut that out.
You can clap.
You can clap
Sorry.
for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wait. No.
We didn't clap the previous one, that's why. So today we learned that you might be living in a computer simulation, that Breaking Bad is a great show, and apparently the crowd is wiser than the 4 of us.
Not the 4 of us.
Well, you had question 4, which was terrible.
The 3 of you.
That subliminal advertising doesn't work, but it's illegal anyway, and that the law of averages is not really a thing, and people probably mean the law of large numbers or something else, and they're confused. Until we catch you next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Be skeptical, not susceptible.
It's great to be back. See y'all next time.
More catchphrases.
And thank you for listening, everyone. If you're interested in the podcast, trcpodcast.com.
Stay skeptical.
Are we doing a Q&A? Is that a thing?
Yeah, I think so.
And we're happy to take any questions now. The formal recording is finished, but we're going to keep going and see if this is any use for anyone else who wants to listen.
Put your reliance in science.
And, you're welcome to ask, either about the show, about doing podcasting. Like, I'm thinking about doing a podcast. Do you have any advice? Those are good questions.
We already answered that on the show, and it was really boring.
Despite what Elan just said, you can pretty much ask anything. If you want to ask something about this particular show, a previous show, whatever.
So ask us anything, but keep in mind that I've told you everything I know about subliminal advertising.
No follow-up questions about subliminal advertising.
I only know what I read on Wikipedia about the law of averages.
And because we've commandeered both microphones, you can probably just shout it out if you have a question.
Oh. Or there might be no questions, and that'll be awkward for
We
everybody.
can turn one of the microphones around.
We
They
could.
can walk up to it.
And does anyone even want to ask a question?
Yeah.
Are there any questions?
Oh, that was all for nothing.
How about a discussion?
So everyone's okay with the fact of living in a simulation?
Scream it.
Yeah,
Stand up.
No,
too.
maybe she could come here.
We can repeat it.
Here, yeah, come here.
Let's say, just for the sake of the argument, we are living in a simulation that's so close to actual reality.
Right.
Does it really matter?
Yeah, why are we wasting everyone's time with this?
Because some people find it interesting.
Oh. but it doesn't matter.
It can matter to some people, but I think it doesn't matter necessarily in terms of practical options of what you're going to do every day.
I think it matters. It could matter in 2 ways, and these are not ways that people care about everyday life. One is if I'm really living in a situation, maybe there's a chance that I can contact the person running it and do something really crazy, like get myself like a big pile of money or something like that. And the other thing is it's kind of troubling, but it means the world could just be turned off at any time, and that's kind of upsetting. But who knows? Maybe the simulation will run to its course and the universe will implode on itself after 3 seconds. So we'll have that time.
Just join my religion. I have a connection with the programmer. So if you have questions, I can pass it on.
Although it is a different category of feasibility, science has already taught us that we should believe things that are very, very counterintuitive. Like the human mind is not built, quote unquote, through evolution and whatnot, to understand the size of the Earth, that we actually go around the sun and the solar system the size of that, and the galaxy and the superclusters and even the size of the universe. Like all of this is absolutely unbelievable in a visceral sense, but we believe it because there's good scientific reasons. And so similarly, this is not believable at all in a visceral sense, but the science on it, you could say, is less sound. Now in 50 years, when, say, or in 100 years, a million years, when someone's like, so we're going to run a simulation in 10 seconds, what do you want to bet now we're in a simulation or not? And one of the interpretations is, if you think our descendants will never run a simulation, then you're not in one, right? So if you think you're not in one now, that means you think it'll never happen. And this is, we'll extend it. It's not just Earth. It's all the universe, all potential intelligent life ever coming to a level while running simulations.
Aliens.
Just yell it out.
Same question in a different way.
Sure.
In French?
You're saying it doesn't matter if you're in a simulation, but we deal with simulations all the time. Low fidelity simulations, like people play RPG games and they don't get tried for murder. So if I believe I'm in a simulation, I can come up there and like assuming I'm able to kill you all and walk away morally like free and clear because I didn't tell anybody it's a simulation.
Can I answer that one, please?
All right.
Thank you.
You get the first crack.
So my answer to that would be, if you murder someone in a game like Skyrim or Oblivion, if guards catch you, they will punish you. They'll take your swords away. And so inside the simulation, you will be punished for crimes within the simulation. So I agree, it wouldn't be fair for the programmer to punish you for doing what you've been programmed to do. But the other programs running inside there, they have been programmed to punish you.
Yeah, you're just an NPC, right? You're not a player.
So in terms of the actual physical consequences of doing a crime, that's there. And I'd say even ethically, that's justifiable too for that reason. So you have ethics within the simulation.
And I would say the simulation is sufficiently sophisticated such that there is real, on our level, pain and suffering and happiness being experienced. So it's not like it's not actually happening. And then further, one would hope that the threat of punishment isn't the only thing keeping you from murdering us all.
Yeah, especially all of us.
Yeah,
No more podcasts, except for Pat. I guess Pat could keep going.
that's true.
Well, it also comes back to the idea of just because it's simulation doesn't mean that these people don't have real consciousness. So it's still murder, even if it's murder of a simulation, even if it's murder by a simulation. But at the end of the day, the person running the simulation doesn't need to care.
Can we talk more about running brains in vats?
Brains and vats, or something to do your dishes?
No, I mean, yeah, like a.
Well, wait, why don't we
Like
see
a
if there's questions?
I don't see
Anything
any
else?
questions. So if there's a digital.
Oh, question. Thank you.
How about this? The people who attended, they'll ask, and then you get to ask a question.
All right, never mind.
You can just yell it out.
Okay. Aren't you making an assumption with the simulation that it's even particularly high fidelity? If you look at the simulation game Life, which is a checkerboard pattern and an ant that follows a preset left-right pattern, it looks really complicated to the ant, but it's in a much more complicated universe. If this is a simulation, it could actually be the dumbed-down version of the real universe.
Oh, very much so.
But it would
Yes.
be consistent from inside, so it really tells us nothing that we're in a consistent universe.
No, you're right. If we are in a simulation, once that is accepted, then the idea of what the larger reality is like, it's almost all bets are off. The laws of physics could be entirely different, and it could be that they're so ahead of us computationally that this is a silly question to even raise. But I was trying to avoid that anything goes situation to validate the point. It's more, if we look at the world as it is right now and assume initially that we're not, it seems to lead to the case that we could be with a decent chance.
Maybe the real world totally sucks. The simulation's like totally awesome. So you're like, finally I broke out of the simulation and be like, it's super horrible here.
Like in the Matrix.
Like in the Matrix.
The universe is going to end in like 20 years.
There's no
And then
lady
you
in the
see
red
the
dress, there's no
simulation.
steak, just proteins and essential nutrients.
Nice.
Question about the research approach. I've heard it said that for any statement X, there's a site on the internet that says X is true and another site that says X is false.
That's probably true, yes. There's an
So-
not equal, but yeah, you can always find someone disagreeing with something you've said.
And quite often there's a preponderance of sites that are trying to state something that's wrong. So how do you navigate through and say these sites are probably right, these sites are probably wrong, especially when it gets into the less sciencey kind of things that you can find on like medical journals or something?
Right. So this is a great question. Like, how do you know what's true and who do you trust?
Well, Elan hasn't answered a question yet, so let's let him do it.
On the
I hope you're paying
Sure.
attention.
I don't know. Well, like when I'm preparing a segment, that's obviously what always comes up. I'm like, I want to do a segment about this, and I like Google, and then you get all these answers, and you have to decide what's right and what's wrong, and it's just a matter of, you know, checking your source, right? Like if it's a study that's been peer reviewed in a good journal, and there's other studies that support it, that's more likely that it's going to be true. Then, of course, for, like you said, less sciencey things, like, so I referenced this U.S. report on purity of methamphetamine. I guess I'm not like 100% sure that's right, but at least what we do on the podcast, what we try to do is always like tell you our sources, and then if someone writes in and tells us why it was a bad source and what we could have, and points to something right, we're always very happy to read it and see like, oh, and learn from that and sort of just hone your skeptical spidey sense, I guess, to know like what seems like a good source.
Yeah, and the truth is sometimes we're wrong, but it's actually pretty rare. I think we have a pretty good track record of being right most of the time, and that's usually because, at least with my preparation, I think the other guys do it too, is you go to like the same usual sources. Like there's some really good bloggers who are experts in their field, or there's general science writers. Like for my segment, I went to thestraightdope.com, which is a column written by Cecil Adams, who's been doing it for like forever, for like 40 years or so. He's been answering questions like, does subliminal advertising work? And he had a very in-depth answer, and I'm prone to usually believe him, although there's the odd article I've read that I was skeptical of his answer, and then I went to other sources and either disagreed with him in the end or not. But usually you check more than one source, but you start with someone you trust. And also, people rag on Wikipedia because anyone could write in there, but it actually has very good error correction in there. As we all know, the wisdom of the crowds works very well. So usually the people that become in charge of various articles on Wikipedia, they tend to be the experts in that area, especially once it becomes contentious. Right,
and also they put their sources. So every single thing we're saying from Wikipedia, we could also be referring to other things. Sometimes I put in the show notes, not the Wikipedia article, but the thing the Wikipedia article pointed to, but I really got it from Wikipedia. I'm just trying to sound more smart in the show notes.
And other times we actually read the scientific paper that was studied, and then because of our background and just trying to apply the reason and evidence, you can try to deduce whether it makes sense or not. But John is right, and over time, people get a good reputation, or sites get a reputation for being trustworthy. Does it mean they're perfect? No. Does it mean anyone is? No. It's almost like we're all in this together, collectively trying to figure out what's going on, and some people have better ways of doing it than others, and over time, knowledge accumulates. And we try to fact check and have multiple sources for things. And we often can also serve as a check on each other, because someone might say something, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. And then it's like, so convince me, and then we'll do it on the show.
And usually, depending on the topic, you can kind of get a sense for, am I going to encounter a lot of false information? Because are people really passionate about this? Like subliminal advertising, there's not that many people passionate about it. So usually the first few links that you see on Google are going to be dispassionate analyses of it. So you could, generally trust it somewhat. It's all degrees of trust. Versus if you were wondering if fluoride is dangerous or not in drinking water, ahead of time that this is a very contentious issue, and there's a lot of people out there that hate the fact that there's fluoride in our drinking water. So to be somewhat skeptical or very skeptical of the first links that pop up when you do a Google search on that.
But that's not actually the segment we did that got the most angry email about. Do you remember what it was? It was we did a segment about, Adam did the segment, I think, about does marijuana cure cancer, and he concluded that it doesn't. And then we got so many angry emails from people saying that like we're being paid off. Marijuana clearly, look at this site, how can you not realize
I'm not sure who pays me off to say that, but whatever.
I think that
cancer, I don't know.
I think that was a big firestorm for two reasons. Because first there's the people who want to cure cancer and think that this is the way to do it, and there's also the people who are promoters of legalizing marijuana. And if it were true, this would be a fantastic argument for legalizing marijuana. And so there's a double whammy of.
We mentioned on the show like marijuana is a good way to maybe forget you have cancer for a few hours, which is nothing wrong with that.
That is a marijuana myth. You were being paid off by the anti-marijuana lobby.
It's a good way to get your appetite up.
Are there any other questions about anything at all?
All right, let's.
So thanks everybody for coming out for another episode of The Reality Check. The show is officially over, so I can pretend to be host again.
And you want to talk about brains in a vat?
No.
Yeah.
Why not? We have time. You can leave if you want. You can
they're
listen to us talk about brains in a vat.
They're being polite right now. They want to go, and they're being like, "Oh, I wish it stopped so I could go."
Don't be Canadian for a moment and
just
leave if you want to.
Do you want to listen to John talk about brains?
If you want to stay for a brain in the vat, you're more than welcome to. So what's the question?
Yeah, I just have one question about so if you had a simulated brain running, like on a Pentium or something that was put into a robot, if you turn it off, is that murder?
Yes.
But what happens if you turn it on? After that,
it's birth.
And then what happens if you just?
You mean are we talking about continuity here?
Yeah.
It's a tricky. No, it's a very important, tricky question. I think robot ethics is going to be one of the things that comes to the fore, if not next year, in the next 10, 20 years. And if you're saying that there's a sufficiently sophisticated conscious entity that, by turning it off, terminates it, then that would be the cessation of its existence, like killing a person. But if it's like going to sleep, then it wouldn't be, because people wake up.
How about the Star Trek transporter? Deconstructs a person atom by atom, reconstructs them somewhere else. You're essentially killing a person and then recreating a copy.
Right. Those are excellent thought experiments, because people often have a notion of a soul, right? It still sticks with them no matter what. So the idea of a transporter, that you're somehow dematerialized and then rematerialized, really you've created another version and destroyed the previous version. And that's all that actually happens. But people think that, well, which one am I? It's like, well, it's hard to believe, but if there was a very, very similar physical system to you, it would have the same thoughts as you, it just wouldn't be you. So it'd be something like with your thoughts just over there, and then you can't access it, which seems odd because you think you can access privileged information internally, and you can to an extent. But if you just create another version, then there's two of you, and then one would be destroyed in that example.
And if Pinkie Pie looks in a magic pond and duplicates herself, and then there's like 50 duplicates, and then Twilight Sparkle kills all but one of them, is that murder? Mass murder?
And if that's random words to you, you don't watch the cartoons that Adam watches.
We're out of time? Yeah, so I think we're out of time.
Yeah. So thank you
so
once
thanks
again.
Everybody again.
And